Hey guys, we are finally beginning our coverage of The Amazing Race 37 with a power ranking following the premiere. So in this video, we'll be ranking every team in the race based on how lucky I think they are to win the race based off everything we saw following the first leg. And I thought this was a pretty fun premiere with a interesting twist, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 14 teams to talk about, and let's waste some more time. Let's get into the video. So starting off at number 14, we technically have the first boots of the season, even though that's kind of wonky. And here we have Mark and Larry, who are the first team to be eliminated here, even though they technically finished 8th overall out of 14, but since they were the last team to finish from their split in the fork in the road, they were eliminated here, and admittedly, they were not a team I would have had super high had I done a preseason power ranking, but they managed to finish this race all right here. Now, they did get off to a pretty slow start, being towards the back of the pack at the start, but they actually were able to crawl their way to the middle of the pack by the time of the fork in the road twist, where I know some people say that they got screwed over by the twist here and how it set up a double elimination based off these splits here. However, I don't fully see it that way, where yes, on one hand, it is kind of strange that they get eliminated despite finishing in the middle of the pack. However, they also chose the more crowded split to take on here, where they were the 17 to get to the fork in the road, and they could clearly see that there were already 4 teams on the dance side of the split versus only one team on the sing split. And the fact that they went for the more crowded split was a pretty suboptimal move for them. And yes, while they said that they probably would have done better on the dance split compared to the sing split, they were still in a situation where they had a lot less room for error compared to had they taken the sing split, where they would have had to compete against 4 other teams that had a head start compared to them, versus the sing split where they only had to contend with one team, and they could have allowed for more teams to come through and possibly do better than them. So I do think at the end of the day, they did make the wrong decision here, and it really cost them by the end, where this dance split was a lot more competitive and had a lot more of the teams that were in the front of the pack. But I still think their elimination was a bit wonky, considering they still managed to finish better than most of the teams that chose to sing split here. And obviously it is a shame to lose them pretty early, as they seem pretty likable. But again, they are now out of the race to where they're here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Jackie and Lauren. And to me, Jackie and Lauren feel like the more standard first boots on a traditional season here, where the episode doesn't even try to hide the fact that they're going home, where they very clearly fall behind early on, and from the point where they're the only team to not be on the first 2 ferries, they're pretty much dead men walking, to where they have no real way of catching up, and the show doesn't even try to hide how far behind they are, to where they make a whole meal after they climb up the stairs, talking about how Lauren's afraid of stairs. They also make a whole meal after they complete the roadblock and how that's a big accomplishment for them. Again, just making it feel like that this leg is their personal journey versus them having any real shot at making it past this first leg. But again, they seem fine enough on their own, but again, not really having much of a chance to do well here, and they're not out of the race as well, to where they're here at number 13. And with that, we had 12 teams left in the race to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the race based on their edit and current game position. But at number 12, the team that I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is Melinda and Erica. And to me, I feel like they're at the bottom, both from a race perspective, but also from an edit perspective, where edit perspective, they were pretty surface level. They didn't really get any proper introduction there, which I think is a pretty bad sign there, especially considering most of the teams at least got some sort of introduction in some way. But on top of that, they're also pretty poorly positioned in the race, to where they finished second to last overall. And while they weren't necessarily in the back of the pack for the entire leg, where they were actually on the first flight coming out of LA, I feel like the fact that they fell so far behind, and the show doesn't really highlight that at all, just makes me think that they're probably not set up to do well moving forward here. And again, I feel like both from a race perspective and from an edit perspective, they're clearly at the bottom for me, which is why they're here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have a team that I also don't feel that great about, and here we have Pops and Jeff. Now, Pops and Jeff got a little bit more to do, where they at least got a match chat at the start of the episode, but beyond that, they didn't even get an intro package later on the episode, which is not a great sign there. I also think inherently, archetype-wise, they're not set up well either, to where you have this team where one member is significantly older than the other. I feel like that just makes it also pretty hard to contend in the race. And I think just looking at the results from leg 1, I mean, they weren't doing that well for a lot of it, where they never got above 10th place overall, and they do finish 11th in the actual leg, 4th place in the sing split. And I feel like the fact that they don't get an intro package just makes me think that they're not set up well storyline wise, mixing in the fact that they didn't do that great from race perspective either. I'm not feeling that great about them either, which is why they're here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have a team who I thought was going to be a little bit higher, but after thinking about their premiere, I'm not feeling that great about them either. And here we have Han and Holden. And Han and Holden seem like they're set up to be like bigger characters on the season, where they do at least get an introduction early on, but even then their introduction is them talking about how they don't work well together and that they see each other as annoying. So to that end, I don't feel great about them in that regard. It feels like set up to them being one of the more dysfunctional teams. And on top of that, they don't do that well across the actual race, to where while they do come out of the roadblock in 5th place and they're the 3rd team to get to the fork in the road and they take the sing split, explaining how they feel confident in it because they know Vietnamese, they still don't do that well at it, to where they actually fall behind to 4th place in the sing split by the end of it. They fall to 12th place overall by the end of the leg. So I'm not feeling that great about them from a race perspective either, mixing in the fact that we do have set up to them kind of being a team that gets on each other's nerves. I'm not feeling the greatest about them either, but again, they at least got a bit more set up than the teams we already talked about, which is why they're here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have a team that also had a pretty rocky road across the first leg, but at least got a proper introduction, and here we have Courtney and Jasmine. And I feel like Courtney and Jasmine at least got a proper setup. They got an intro package talking about how they're nurses and how they would like to seal their relationship without rushing it. So I feel like we get to know them pretty well across the premiere. However, from a race perspective, they do pretty poorly, to where while they get off to a decent start being the first flight out, and they actually manage to be in 4th place for the first half of the leg, they do later fall behind to 2nd to last by the end of the roadblock, and they also get lost on the way to the fork in the road, which is not particularly great there. They end up choosing the dance split, which is a really risky move, as they were the last team to sign up for that, despite there being plenty of other slots for the sing split there. And they end up barely surviving this leg, to where while they do end up finishing 7th overall, they were also 2nd to last on the dance split when they didn't need to. So I feel like Courtney and Jasmine barely survived this leg, even though they actually finished in the middle of the pack there. And obviously with them getting lost at one point, there's definitely some red flags about them from a racing perspective, but I feel like it's the fact that they at least got an introduction in the premiere, and the fact that they at least have some ability where they were able to at least scrape on by through the dance split. That makes me a little confident in them, but I feel like I'm going to need to see more from them in order for them to actually be higher in this list. But for now, I do have them here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and this is probably a team that I have less faith in from a racing perspective compared to Courtney and Jasmine, but I feel like they were also bigger characters across the premiere. And here we have Scott and Lori. And I feel like Scott and Lori got a pretty big edit across this premiere here, where they were the first team to get an intro package. They also got a match chat. I feel like we got to see a lot of Scott and Lori across this premiere, even though they ended up finishing around the middle of the pack, where I feel like a lot of their early leg was pretty mediocre, where they were 8th place coming into the roadblock, 6th place coming out of it. They also get lost on the way to the fork in the road, being 12th place to get there, though they do make the correct decision and decide to go for the sing split there. And they do end up finishing all right, to where they end up finishing 10th place overall, 3rd place within the sing split group. So I feel like they finished the leg all right, even though they definitely don't scream out as super strong racers based off this first leg, but it's the fact that they got such a big edit across this premiere, which makes me think that they're going to be these bigger characters on the season, that makes me want to put them one spot higher at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have another team that got a decent amount of screen time across the episode, and another team who very much felt like a roller coaster during this premiere, and here we have Jonathan and Anna. And if we are looking at their race track record, I feel like it was definitely all over the place for Jonathan and Anna, where they got to a really hot start, where they were the first team to get to the airport. They were also the first team to get to the roadblock, largely due to them being the only team that was able to get to the ferry before everyone else, which could have really allowed them to run away with this leg. However, due to them not catching the ferry on the way back, it allowed the other teams to catch up, effectively putting them in an equalizer. And they do fall quite a bit behind afterwards, where they do eventually fall to 8th place coming into the fork in the road. However, they do make a pretty wise decision to go with the sing split, as that was the less crowded split at the time. And they are able to do pretty well at it, to where they eventually finish 2nd place in the split. However, it is 9th place overall in the actual leg, so much for that. And again, it is definitely a roller coaster from a race perspective. However, from an edit perspective, we also get to know them pretty well, where they get to talk a lot about how Amazing Race brought them back together after they had a pretty rocky relationship for a lot of it, which makes me think that they could be like these major figures on the season because of that. So I do feel like I feel somewhat confident in Jonathan and Anna to make a deep run on the season, However, I feel like their performance in this first leg was not the best in the world, to where I do have to leave them behind here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have another team who had a bit of a roller coaster of a leg here, but still got plenty of setup as a team to look out for, and here we have Nick and Mike. And I feel like Nick and Mike also have a bit of a roller coaster here, where admittedly they got off to a pretty rocky start to where they are 8th place at the airport. They also do fall behind to 10th place at the roadblock, however they're able to recover a bit. However, they're able to really make up a lot of ground coming into the fork in the road, to where they're actually the very first team to show up at the fork in the road, and they do choose the dance split there. However, they do struggle a lot with the actual task, and they do end up eventually falling all the way to 5th place on the split there, and do eventually come away at 6th place overall by the end of the leg. So a bit of a fall from grace there. However, at the same time, they also get a pretty solid introduction talking about how they're this team that are pretty big fans of the show and how they've been trying to apply several times. We even get their previous audition tapes there. So I do feel like Nick and Mike are a team to look out for. I feel like they're a team that we definitely got to know pretty well across the premiere. Though at the same time, their race performance was a bit inconsistent here, to where I do have to leave them behind at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have a team that is really only this high because they did well on the actual leg. However, I feel like edit-wise, there's a lot to be desired. By number 5, we do have Ernest and Bridget. And again, Ernest and Bridget do pretty well by the end of it, to where they end up getting 3rd overall on the leg here. And again, while they do have a rockier start to where they're 6th place at the airport, they're 11th place coming into the roadblock, they're able to recover very well to where they end up coming to the fork in the road in 4th place. They do pretty well during the dance split and end up getting that 3rd place finish by the end of it. But despite this, we know almost nothing about them, to where despite them having this pretty incredible comeback when you really think about it, the fact that they don't get any introduction and we don't really know much about them coming out of the premiere is probably a bad sign in terms of how well they'll do moving forward. But I feel like just based off their pure performance across this leg, I couldn't entirely ignore that. But again, I do feel better about other teams based on their edits and race performance, to where they're here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is a team that did pretty well across the leg, and we do get to know them a little bit, though I'm still a bit unsure over how well they're actually do by the end of it. But number 4, we do have Bernie and Kerrigan. And Bernie and Kerrigan do kind of stand out, where they do get a confessional right at the beginning of the episode talking about how Kerrigan will help them stay on track while Bernie's mind will be racing. Again, sort of setting up their dynamic as this team here, which could imply that they could struggle working together, that they could have these issues down the road. But I think it was still a fine enough introduction for them. And if we are looking at the performance across the race here, it is not that dissimilar from Ernest and Bridget's, where they are 10th place coming into the airport. They are 6th place coming to the roadblock, though they do pretty well at the roadblock, to where they come out of that in 3rd place. And while they do struggle a bit on the dance split, they end up doing all right by the end of it, getting a 4th place finish by the end of the race. So I do feel pretty good about Bernie and Kerrigan race-wise, and I think edit-wise, we did get that little introduction from them that makes me think they could be somewhat relevant to the story, certainly more so than Ernest and Bridget, which is why I did edge them above them at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and I feel like these top 3 are all teams that did well enough on the actual race across this first leg, but still got decent enough edits to where I feel like they definitely have a good shot there. But number 3, we do have Alyssa and Josiah. And I think Alyssa and Josiah are a team that do get off to a slow start, where they are 11th place to the airport. They're also 7th place coming into the roadblock. However, they managed to scrape by a decent finish, where they are the first team to choose the sting split there, which is a pretty smart move there. They end up entering the less competitive split, and they are the first team to finish that split, and they do technically win their side of the fork in the road, even though they're only 5th place overall. So I do feel like that is an interesting aspect to them, but they still get an overall good introduction, where they get an intro package talking about how both of them are go-getters. Alyssa's a genius, while Josiah is a clown, and now Alyssa needs someone to balance her out. So they do get plenty set up to them being like this team that could balance each other out. They could be this good, well-rounded team because of that. And I feel like mixing in the fact that they do pretty well across the actual leg here makes me think that they could have a decent shot moving forward. But I do feel a little bit better about the top 2 teams from a race perspective, which is why I do have to leave them behind here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and this is a team that did pretty well across the actual leg here. However, I feel like the number 1 team had a slightly stronger edit while still doing well race-wise. By number 2, we do have Carson and Jack, who ended up winning the entire leg, being first overall and remaining near the top of the pack for pretty much the entire leg, where they are the second team to get to the airport. They're the second team coming into the roadblock. Now, they do technically fall behind to 7th place by the end of the roadblock, but again, that was in a spot to where the teams were all pretty bunched together, so I don't fault them too much for that. But they're able to quickly make up ground where they're the second team to get to the fork in the road. They choose the dance split, and they do pretty well at that, even managing to pass Nick and Mike to end up winning the leg overall. So I do feel pretty strong about Carson and Jack in general from a race perspective. But I feel like from an edit perspective, we still got an introduction from them talking about how they are Dungeon and Dragon freaks, and they do get a match at the beginning. Now, admittedly, I think their edit is a bit quieter than their number one person, so I feel like I do have to knock them a bit for that. But I still feel like from a race perspective, they're doing pretty well, which is why they're here at number 2. And now at number 1, the team that I believe is the most likely to win the Amazing Race, 37 right now, is Brett and Mark. And I feel like Brett and Mark are a team that do pretty similarly to Carson and Jack across the actual leg here, where while they do have a slower start, being 7th to the airport, being on that second flight, being 5th place coming to the roadblock, they are able to quickly make up ground by being second to finish the roadblock. And while they do fall behind again, being 9th place to the fork in the road, they actually have a very strong showing in the dance split, where they end up being second to finish that, despite them being one of the last teams to show up. And they do manage to finish second overall, which is really impressive when you think about it. But I think the thing that edges them above Carson and Jack is the fact that they do have a bit of a stronger edit, where they do get an intro package talking about how they've been together for 10 years and how they're these performers on the Vegas Strip. And that largely explains why they are able to do so well on the dance split, despite them being one of the last teams to show up. So I feel like because of that, I do feel a bit better about Brett and Mark, where they do at least get a proper introduction, a proper intro package, mixing in with their strong performance across the actual leg. I do feel a bit more confident in Brett and Mark at this current point, even though Carson and Jack were a bit more consistent across the actual leg, which is why I do have them here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe to help with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm covering Survivor 48 as well as Australian Survivor, so be on the lookout for that. I'm on Patreon and have YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.